So we're going to get started, everyone. This is Jenny Seifert, and I'm here with Tim Campbell. We are going to be your hosts today. So as you all seen the emails, you know what this webinar is all about. We're going to take about 15 or so minutes to just sort of talk about, give you all some context. And we're going to, Bret Shaw is going to start us off. He's faculty at UW-Madison who did some work a couple of years ago on this initiative. And if you have questions during the presentation, we're going to mute everybody during the presentation part. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat function. I guess send those questions to the person called Sea Grant and Water Resources. And then after the presentation part, we will unmute everyone for the discussion. And when the discussion comes around, just if you can introduce yourself before you ask a question or offer a comment so we know who you are, that'd be great. So without further ado, Bret, are you back?
Yes, I am.
Great. So Bret's going to start us off with some just some context for sort of why why this initiative came about and some of the social science behind it.
All right, great. So I'll get started. So I think I know a number of you on the phone call, but not all. So we initially started this project a while ago. I think we did the first survey in 2010. And this was when I first started my job. I started working with Bob Korf and Jeff Bodie and some of the different people that were there and looking at what's the best way to communicate with transient anglers about adopting behaviors that prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. And really early on, using communication theory, I got the sense that bait shop owners, managers, staff were sort of a obligatory hub in the transient angling experience. And then there's different kinds of bait shops, like the classic mom and pop bait shop, all the way to, you know, going to Walmart or Gander Mountain. What we're mostly talking about here is sort of the classic kind of smaller town recreational bait shop. So, Jenny, I don't know if you want to go to the next slide. So the thinking behind this is a lot of times when people do environmental behavior change campaigns, they go, you know, boy, we sent out a brochure and people didn't change their behavior. Well, that's the norm. It's rare that mass communication, like a singular TV ad or brochure or fact sheet, makes substantial behavior change, but it is an important part of the marketing mix. So usually when we think about mass communication, by that I include things that don't involve people talking with people, it is associated with awareness and knowledge gain, which is an important part of what we're trying to do. But research also suggests that interpersonal communication, you know, a bait shop owner talking with their customers, a angler talking with a friend or family member, that's more likely to be associated with actual attitude change. And something else we know from communication research, and we've known this since about World War II, some of the early sociologists and communication scholars, there used to be this notion of communication almost like a needle, that, you know, these messages would be broadcast on newspapers or TV and people would just absorb them and we'd all follow directions like automatons or robots. Well, obviously that's not true. In fact, most people aren't paying attention to most things most of the time. And that is because we have way too much stimulus coming at us. We have our own priorities. We're worried about having fun, you know, convenience, what's for dinner. But what we do know is that people pay attention to certain people within their networks who are considered opinion leaders. And in the context of transient angling, as far as what we're talking about today, we're conceiving of people that work at bait shops, own bait shops, manage bait shops as being one potential source of opinion leaders in the context of getting boaters and anglers not to move around things and spread aquatic invasive species. So we were able to do 2 surveys in the course of this, and a lot of interviews and bait shop visits. So when we first did the survey, we were looking for, well, we didn't start this from scratch. Bait shops were doing plenty of things through the aquatic invasive species coordinators and other relationships with the Department of Natural Resources, but we're asking, well, what are you already doing relating to preventing this threat of aquatic invasive species? What are you willing to do? That kind of thing. And encouragingly, over 70% agreed or strongly agreed that they themselves could play an important role in preventing aquatic invasive species. And we, at the time, were also taking a very close look at viral hemorrhagic septicemia. And again, 74% were already displaying some kind of educational materials about aquatic invasive species. What we want to do is create a more systematized toolkit that AIS coordinators and others could use to engage with bait shop owners, managers, and staff. But also, it was never meant to be a one-off intervention. It was meant to be a starting point where people were provided solid materials, but that other people would come up with creative ideas. It would provide an excuse for coordinators and others to have ongoing appointments and relationships, give them an excuse to go back into the bait shop and chat with people. So in this case, it was actually a lot of fun. The memories are still quite vivid. But so we had the opportunity with a grant to do the research up front, asking bait shop owners, managers, and staff, what do they think about aquatic species, to actually produce a toolkit and then to evaluate the success of that toolkit. So I'll give you a little bit of information on that. So it made really clear that bait shop owners were definitely willing to help. I mean, even myself, because later I talked to coordinators, and I said, hey, these people are really open to this stuff. But even in shops that I went into where I was a little bit nervous, just because they seemed a little scowly, that by the time we talked to them and just acknowledged, hey, you're the expert here, we think you could really be influential, without exception, I'm sure there's grumpy people in any profession, but when we approach people with sort of an open mind in the sense that you're the expert, I was really surprised at how open they were to chat with us and share their ideas. So it's clear that the point of sale, that is when people are buying fishing licenses, when they're purchasing things, that's the main opportunity to have a discussion with people. They were less likely to approach someone in the aisles and say, hey, could I talk to you about aquatic invasive species? So we kind of built some of our strategy around this idea that the conversation, if it occurs, is likely to occur when a sale is occurring. And the bait shop owners also said that customers appreciate free things, what in the corporate world we call swag. But we also thought a lot about that, which I'll go into a little bit more in the next slides. So some of the challenges, there was an uncertainty about the threat. In particular, some thought that viral hemorrhagic septicemia was sort of overblown, and so they were just kind of questioning, like, is this as big a deal as you all are saying it is? Some of them had a lack of self-efficacy, which is a sense, self-efficacy is very close to this idea of like, I could talk with my customers, but it won't make a difference. And another legitimate barrier that's not surprising is a lack of time to engage with customers. So if you have people that are waiting behind other people in line, you might say thank you, have a nice day, but they're less likely to stop and have a prolonged conversation about aquatic invasive species, and I don't think that's too surprising. So it's also not surprising if you look at bait shop owners that they're more likely to actually do what I call passive activities than active ones. So passive activities are putting up a poster, giving away free keychains. Active ones are when you really start talking with people about aquatic invasive species. And so people did both, but they're more likely to do the passive ones. And I think that would be true on any opinion leader campaign. And we also did find through our evaluation, this is looking at the follow-up survey, that contact with an aquatic invasive species coordinator or extension agent can enhance the bait shop owner's self-efficacy and willingness to educate customers. I also want to point out, because I don't think this showed up in the slides, but I don't know if you all saw, but in 2014, an independent research team out of Cornell did a survey of all the Great Lakes states and Canadian provinces, looking at both transient anglers as well as bait shop engagement, which I was so surprised that someone would do such niche research like I would. But just as a reminder, Wisconsin was the #1 of the Great Lakes states as far as bait shop engagement, and it was also among the top, I think only matching itself with Ontario in terms of actual compliance and awareness amongst transient anglers are related to aquatic invasive species. So I bring that up because we're talking about a case study here, but whatever we're doing, and I'm sure it's not just the program I'm talking about here, Wisconsin has been an intellectual and strategic leader in thinking through some of these issues. So again, I've talked about self-efficacy, but it's basically in many campaigns I do, bait shop staff were pretty knowledgeable. Bait shop owners were pretty knowledgeable about what to do, but they were a little less certain that their customers would care about what they had to say. And that was the idea about empowering them. And as part of the toolkit that we'll be talking about, that I guess Jenny or Tim will be talking about, is sort of give them the tools and confidence that they can have these conversations easily with their clientele. And I think our case study in general provided encouraging early evidence about the value of building and systematizing this relationship between outreach people in the state, AIS coordinators, DNR people, NGOs, lake associations, and bait shops. Is this something you guys are getting into, or do you want me to?
If you could do this, that would be great.
Okay. Well, one of the ideas here, too, is that in the field of social marketing, one of the things that is talked about is this idea of behavioral prompts. And so what this means is that a lot of times we just need a simple reminder about what to do. I've even found myself in that situation when I'm leaving a boat launch and someone's behind me and I get nervous, like, slow down, breathe. But a lot of times we think about, for instance, like the stickers that go on the boat hitch or the keychains that we ultimately ended up distributing widely throughout the state, is it makes sense to remind people when and where they're actually performing the behavior. And bait shop owners advocated informational materials that were simple and straightforward. And this is important to note because probably a fair amount of people on this phone call are probably experts in their field, and so probably really interested in the science, passionate about it, want to share it with others, and that's good. I actually probably not as expert as most of you on the call, but I know more than the average person. But what we've heard the bait shops folks was that you need to simplify this. And the prompts like the floating keychains, and again, this was these keychains that when you pull your key out of your boat, it actually tells you the steps to do. And the bait bucket stickers, and again, this was more related to VHS, were particularly well received. And also, we did things like run press releases, and we ran an ad in Wisconsin Outdoor News thanking specific bait shops for their involvement in the initiative. And they appreciated, just like anybody would, being respected and acknowledged for their efforts. And it was pretty easy to do. So again, the bait shop toolkit, I couldn't remember, but from a theoretical standpoint, we basically went through a book like Mackenzie Moore. I mean, it was a bit more sophisticated than that, but the Mackenzie Moore book, Fostering Sustainable Behavior, and looked to provide a set of tools. So some of these tools were the specific prompts or reminders. These are stickers for boat hitches, bait buckets, floating keychains, that kind of thing. Really focused on creating effective messages. So we had also done quite a bit of research with transient anglers themselves in the state using a DNR list. But so we had a sense for what parts about aquatic invasive species would really resonate with our target audience. And we didn't implement this as deeply, but there's also research that shows when you get people to express a commitment, whether it's a pledge card or standing in front of others and saying, I'm willing to lose weight, drink less, prevent aquatic invasive species, that kind of thing, that they're more likely to actually follow through with that behavior.
So thanks, Brett. I can talk about some of the products
Excellent.
We have. So I think Brett's going to hang out on the call here and take part in the discussion because he was really interested to hear what you all had to say about it.
Yep.
I'm going to go through some of this stuff pretty quickly because I know we talked about it at the AIS coordinator meeting. But so we have a bunch of different products as part of our toolkit. This is probably the most common piece that we have in here. This is the front and back consumer handout. This is the thing that we thought that the bait owners would be handing to people. And as I think, well, as we talked about before, this was compared to the standard Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers brochure, and this is what the bait shop owners liked better than the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers brochure. Really simple, right to the point, doesn't look overly produced or anything like that. And as we work through like this piece and some of the other pieces, we might have an opportunity to pull together a small group of folks to look at revising some of these a little bit if we need to before we print them off again. So if people are looking at these and they have great ideas for maybe one thing to add, or we could add a different picture or something like that, we'll probably be pulling together a group of people to help tweak some of these things before we go through a big print run of them.
I just want to say, too, there's nothing special about the particular design, and I'm sure the design could be improved, but the idea that they preferred simpler over more complex is one that I think is true.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So, we'll keep that in mind, too, as we look to, if we even want to redesign that. But, like I mentioned, the two-sided AIS brochure, the one that's part of the toolkit, the bait shop owners actually like that more than the AIS coordinators. And then on the flip side, we liked the more complicated Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers brochure that was 8 pages long a little bit better. So I think that's just something really interesting to think about. So we also have the bait bucket stickers. Again, it's a prompt that we put on the bait buckets to help people to remind them what the AIS prevention steps are and to really get them to focus on that water behavior. We have the trailer stickers that are part of the toolkit as another prompt to remind people as they're loading up their boats to take action. And then we also have the FAQ document, and this was something that was really designed to give to the employees to help empower them so that way they felt like they knew why we wanted them to talk about aquatic invasive species and to help them answer some of the most common questions that they get. And we heard in the limited discussion we had at the coordinators meeting that this document was really well received by people. I don't think we need to talk about that. For the floating keychains, again, we ordered more of these, are already in stock. Like I mentioned before, that they're not these smaller foam ones, they're more the keychainer ones that people seem to like a little bit better. They're a little, well, I think they might hold 4 keys instead of 2 before they sink, so people seem to like that. And everyone, well, yeah, the keychains were well received by customers, and from the feedback, we improved the quality. Here's an example of the bait shop recognition certificate. We hope to at least have this template available for people. We are not sure that we're going to be printing them off for people, but we'll have the template available. Here's just the example of the one of the template press releases that people sent out as another type of recognition for the bait shops we're working with. And so that was the toolkit, in like 5 minutes, because you guys have all seen that before. And this is really the discussion part that we really wanted to focus on. And I'm going to let Jenny take over from here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So this is an opportunity just to hear your feedback on sort of how you envision this as being a valuable part of your work. If you have already engaged with bait shop owners in your area, what are some of the good experiences that you've had, and why do you think they were good? And I have some slides that have these questions on them, and we'll just sort of run through them. So if you want to say something, again, please introduce yourself first and then offer your thoughts. So I guess we could start with this sort of slide, which is around sort of how you envision, how, and again, thinking about your ideas that could also be helpful to others on the call. So how do you think this is valuable to your work, and how do you envision it as part of your work plans?
And everyone, one last housekeeping thing that I meant to say earlier. I think this will just be easier this way. I may regret it, but I'm going to unmute everyone just in case you're not super tech savvy and can't find out where the unmute button is on the side. But if you are logged on onto the web, if you bring up the participants list and find your own name, if you click off to the far right, you'll have a little microphone symbol. You can click that to mute or unmute yourself. So if you could self-regulate that, that would be awesome. But I know we have a couple of people that are just called in that I'm going to be sure to unmute, so that way it's easy for them.
So would anyone like to sort of kick things off?
You all still there?
Yep, we're here. Sorry. Somehow my computer unmuted myself.
Because I unmuted her. We have multiple computers in this room to try to keep up with chats and stuff. If anyone ever wants to do another webinar on how to run one of these, it would be a lot of fun. Because it's not as easy as it seems sometimes.
I thought we were going to outer space there for a second. With I do have a question about the toolkit. This is Jeannie. I haven't actually used it. I just haven't really had the opportunity, although I do drop things off with bait shops when I have that chance. Can you just go back real quick? I wanted to see what that press release thing was. That was the first time I ever heard about it.
Yeah, I don't think it was used that widely. I mean, one of the interesting things, and again, I assume we have some aquatic invasive species coordinators on the phone, is it wasn't like a mandatory that each they kind of selected what they wanted to do, but the idea, and I work for small town newspapers, I presented it at the aquatic invasive species coordinator meetings years ago, but I don't think it was used that frequently. But I don't think it would be hard to get some attention once a year for a bait shop in a small town paper, at least based on my experience.
And we do, I think between Jenny and myself, we'll try to produce more of these templates for people to send out, but not even just in local newspapers, but also like Lake Association newsletters, anything that you can easily get something into. These templates, they work for that too, not just local newspapers.
So maybe an easier place to start is for anyone on the call who has already engaged with bait shop owners, do you want to share what your experience was like, and what are some good experiences and maybe some bad experiences and what you learned from them?
We can't, I'm not sure what the dog's saying, but would somebody...
This is a great idea.
Yeah.
This is Bob. I'll share an experience I had. There's a very, very small bait shop in Kiel, Wisconsin, about 20 minutes north of Plymouth. And I stop in there periodically to talk to the owner and to buy a couple of minnows. And I have never ever gotten the impression that the owner really cared. I would try to spend as much time as I could, but it was pretty obvious that he wasn't inclined to talk to anybody about AIS. He wasn't really interested in displaying anything, or really wasn't someone that I felt was going to engage. And I stopped in there several times, and each time I stop, I get the same impression that just is not willing to engage. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that it takes a long time to develop a relationship. It takes a long time to get to know somebody and find out what motivates them or maybe turns them off. And I think one of the things that turned them off was the old DNR introduction. As soon as I mentioned DNR, it was pretty much over with. And I regret that in some ways. But I'm wondering if other department staff had similar experiences either with bait shops or others, where as soon as you mention DNR, you see the lights go off and the attitudes come out. Because that's what's happened to me, and the bait shop owner has never shown any inclination of recovering from that.
This is Mike up in Superior. if you can all hear me, I'll just maybe give some contribution to that. The one thing that I'm told, and I work with aquatic invasive species up here with the ballast water program, but one of the things that they talk about when it comes to negotiations or try and get somebody to open up to you is you got to have two things. As you mentioned, you've got to first build a relationship. Somebody coming walking off the street has very little capital with a new person, usually. And the second thing that they talk about is that you have to, the first thing that you have to do is address the other person's concerns. They talk about fears and concerns. If they're worried about regulation, they're worried about bad publicity turning their business down, and those are all legitimate concerns. And so, whether it's with bait shops or with Wall Street, if you want to promote a particular agenda, you have to address the concerns of their business, and you have to have a rapport with them, and that is all a big time factor and an investment on your part, getting to know what concerns them, understanding the market, and understanding some of the things that aren't particularly obvious, especially if you've got to connect the dots. If you don't, in the bait business, if somebody doesn't recognize that talking about VHS might drive away potential customers because people stop vacationing there because they think there's a disease, whether that's a legitimate concern or not, it's real from some people's perceptions, and you've got to be able to address that. And you've got to be able to figure out that connection's there. And so I think that's it's quite a challenge, will be my final comment. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anyone else have an experience working with a bait shop that they'd like to share?
Good afternoon from Duluth. This is Doug Jensen with Minnesota Sea Grant Program. Thank you for your presentation and the opportunity to comment on this. We have been reaching out to bait shop owners and also convenience stores and places that have been selling fishing licenses for many years and distributing out watch cards. And I just wanted to add that they've been very, very receptive in distributing out materials when we've offered them to them. We had 2 interns last summer that distributed from Cloquet all the way to Grand Portage based on our recent print run of watch cards. And in 2 days, they distributed out 19,600 cards. And so that's just an example, a testimonial right there that those types of shops are generally very receptive. We've only had 1 bait shop in the entire region that has said no, that they wouldn't distribute those complementary materials. Thank you.
That's great.
Thanks, Doug. Do you have any thoughts on why you think it's worked so well?
I think I have some thoughts on it, and we actually have some, I guess, indirect evidence of it. What we have learned over the past 25 years or so when addressing aquatic invasive species and how our communication and education outreach has changed is that once people understand what the threats are, they're much more motivated to take action. And we've seen that among recreational anglers in all of our different surveys that we've done. And I would suspect that though, the bait shop owners and the clerks that work there, they're also exposed to the message, and certainly they're a different breed of people, no doubt about it. But I mean that in a positive way. But there's no reason to expect that they also, once they understand the threat, would be willing to take part and take some ownership over the issue.
Great, thanks, Doug.
This is Chris Hammerl on Stevens Point.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, I've kind of had mixed results, and I think it's kind of been touched on already, but building that rapport in the areas that I've lived in where the bait shop owners recognize me or kind of know me, obviously it's a little easier to get in, and depending how much room they have, some of these bait shops I think of one in Princeton. The place is jammed head to toe with stuff, and they were receptive to the message, but they really didn't have room to put much up. So spacing was very limited. So that's just something to keep in the back of our minds. You know, in the bait shops in the Wassa area, Tomahawk area, I had good success there, but more because I think they kind of recognized me, or, you know, we had past experience. In some of the places that I went where I had never been before, it was a little more, okay, well, we can fit this up, and that's kind of where it went. So, I don't know, I've had mixed results.
You know, if you wouldn't mind my adding one thing, I don't want to interrupt the flow of sharing other experience, but coming from a corporate marketing world where I worked in the marketing department and supported the sales staff, I know that aquatic species coordinators and, you know, sort of allied professionals aren't salespeople per se, but there is a sales component to it, right? You're going in, introducing a new idea or a new program to someone, and it's pretty normal in any context that while I personally found most people to be receptive to it, you know, I went to like a half dozen. In any sales context, you're going to have some people that are like, yeah, absolutely. You know, some that are like, well, I don't know, but I want to learn more, and some that are just like, no. So if we think about it in terms of selling any other idea, you know, or service or product, not everyone's going to bite, right? And so that's I think the reality of trying to introduce a new concept or service to somebody.
And I think it's a great segue into sort of this next question of how can we set ourselves up for good experiences? If anyone has thoughts to offer on that?
Well,
I'll get in on that. This is Chris again.
Go for it, Chris.
Just going from maybe some things I heard early on about what we were looking at revamping here, doing, it sounded like we may be just looking at targeting certain bait shops and not all of them. Am I kind of correct?
I think yeah, and that's you're reflecting something that Tim and I were interested in suggesting in terms of when thinking about the bait shops in your area. I think it could be easy to get overwhelmed thinking you have to go to every single shop, but instead perhaps we might suggest, you know, finding a couple that are receptive and really building a good relationship with them.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of that's where my brain was going here. You know, pick out those ones that maybe have the good traffic, or that you're able to build a rapport and they seem receptive. You know, so you can spend a little more quality time with them rather than just stopping in, you know, trying to get to know them a little bit and dropping information off, and then they don't see you for another 6 months to a year. So, yeah, I think maybe just picking a few and spending more quality time. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else?
You know, I've thought a lot about bait shops, obviously, so I wanted to ask a question about that. I think it's normal for people, and I've done campaigns for decades now across lots of different contexts, is that it's always easier to talk with someone that you know and like, and I do the same thing. But I think gaining some comfort or, you know, familiarity with reaching outside of a comfort zone and maybe not hitting every shot, but, you know, being willing to say, okay, I don't like doing this for people I don't know, but every season I'm going to do 3 that I haven't talked with before. Because I think people have a tendency to fall back on what is familiar and comfortable, which is a fantastic foundation or base. Also, to reach outside the comfort zone and not assume others aren't interested.
This is Mike up in Superior.
Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks. Maybe this is a little tangential, but you know, one of the things that I do when I talk, I've got a slightly different clientele, but when I go and talk to people in the shipping industry about transport of aquatic invasive species, I carry with me a binder of 8.5 by 11 printouts of various aquatic invasive species and information. And sometimes one of the ways that I'm able to a lot of these people I'm meeting for the first time, I will probably never see them again. They're from around the world and their local entities. But when I open up my little folder and I show them a close-up of the mouth of a sea lamprey, it gets their attention. When I flip to the next chart and I show the graphic indicating the population decline of lake trout by about 98, 99% in Lake Superior, a document or an image provided by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I think for the Michigan portion of Lake Superior. It helps to grab their attention and add some validity to the message that I'm trying to bring. So in addition to bringing conversations, sometimes I'll bring in, I just have a little educational materials, but they're going to be kind of the more acute images, if you will. And I seem to be getting good responses from that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
That's an interesting idea, Mike. It might be something that the folks might want to try, is to have some examples of what these species are, what they look like. I don't know if we would leave them there or just show them to the shop owner and say, this is what they look like. But maybe half a dozen color laminated cards that show some of the most abundant species.
This is Mike again. One of the things that I show to people, and just to give people an idea of what I'm dealing with, when a commercial vessel comes into the Duluth Superior Harbor, if I've done my calculations correctly based on some work that some folks have done here in a paper, we bring in about 6 billion zooplankton with each freshwater discharge from Lower Lake Michigan when they come in from the Chicago area. And I have pictures of our native, some species of native zooplankton, and it looks like a nice squishy little donut. Looks very appetizing if you're a fish. And then immediately next to it, I have the picture of the spiny water flea that looks kind of hideous and has that long, pointy, sharp-looking tail. And I explain how some fish are not able to or do not want to eat that, whereas they would normally want to eat the other zooplankton that is all like a cream puff donut. And sometimes showing those contrasts, I don't want to come in there and be a catastrophist or anything like that, but showing the graphics. We've got one graphic up here that shows from a recent seining haul in the Lake Superior Bay that 60 or 70% of the fish that they caught were invasive species, and that the other species that they used to want are no longer there. So sometimes it's not only bringing in the pictures of here's what a rough looks like, but also showing the second picture of, okay, now here's what it's displaced, so that they can put something tangible to have a tangible image in their mind, so to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great ideas, Mike. I know some of the bait shops I visited, touch on a couple of things you said. They really appreciated the field. I dropped off some invaders of the Great Lakes Field Guides, just so in case if they ever had questions about these things, they could look up information on them easily. But also just answering people's questions and making sure they know what they want to know. Even I get a lot of fisheries questions, so I pretend like I'm Titus Seilheimer, the fishery specialist with Sea Grant sometimes, and try to answer the questions, because that helps build the relationship to get them so I can talk about aquatic invasive species. Speaking of Titus, if you aren't looking at the chat function, he did mention that another good strategy for engaging people is just trying to maybe, again, talk what they care about, and economic impacts of aquatic invasive species can be really influential with business owners. They may not care as much about the the ecological impacts. What they may care the most about is people coming in and out of their shop buying things. And so if we can talk about the impact of AIS on some of those businesses, that would be influential. He does point out, though, that it can be challenging when you can't quantify the impacts. So it's hard to figure out what the impacts of any given invasive species might be, but you can talk about like how much the lake or the Great Lakes fishery is worth, at $4 to $7 billion. And if invasive species threatens that, that could be a big issue.
Jim, this is Doug.
Hey, Doug.
Hey, your comment, I really like the last comment you made, and it is a good segue to circle back to something that Bret said, and that has to do with the self-efficacy issue. What I'm finding in our surveys is for those people that aren't taking action, which is a very small percentage, or are willing to take action to do the clean, drain, dry every time, everywhere, what I'm seeing amongst that small population is a tendency for them to sort of fall back on some issues related to values and attitudes. And Bret touched on one of them, and that is the self-efficacy issue. Will their actions make a difference to prevent the spread? So that's one communication issue that can be addressed maybe a little bit better. I know it can be better in Minnesota, that's for sure. But the other thing is the perceived control belief, and that is that the spread is inevitable, that they're spreading wildly, and it's out of control, and there's nothing they can do. So that would be another communication point to address this particular audience. Two real quick ones, and you just touched on it, and that's the egoistic value, to put it in the context of some kind of economic cost or economic harm, and to try to pair that up, I guess, as best as we can with the environmental costs as well, but understanding that these guys are selling minnows to try to make a living. And then the last one is weak normative beliefs, and that is based on their own personal and social norms. Can they expect that anglers that they're selling bait to are going to take the necessary action to prevent the spread? So just some kind of tangential but somewhat related thoughts related to communication and the self-efficacy and the evaluation issue. Thanks.
There's one thing that I just wanted to add that is really interesting. One is we didn't look at values in this bait shop survey, but I've done that with work promoting natural shorelines, and the shared values are highly predictive of actual behavior. And there's also a piece that I wrote with Deb Sealer, who's now with California Sea Grant, but many of you probably know her through her role in the position that Jenny's now in. But we segmented transient angler groups by high risk, like kind of low risk, and no risk. So no risk was people that don't move their boats around at all. They get a boat license, but they just keep it in the same place all the time. Then there was a second group that moved, and then the third group moved regularly within 5-day time periods. And these people also were more likely to say that it's not controllable, which is interesting because if you think about it from like a public health context, is those that are seeing more risk think it's going to be harder to overcome. So it's not necessarily an inaccurate perception, but I just want to validate that that I've seen that same phenomenon with transient anglers as well. I'd be happy to share that paper with anyone who hasn't seen it.
Thanks, Bret. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next couple of questions. And so we were talking about how we can sort of establish good relationships, but then once we have established them, what do you all think about some good ways to maintain the relationship over the long term?
This is Mike in Superior.
Hey, Mike.
So just very quickly here, one of the other things that I found useful that goes along with my little slides that I bring with me is there are a number of people that I do see on a regular basis, and in one of my researching some of my background material, I found an article that described the color that was best seen by deep feeding lake trout. And so I took that, I printed out some information. It happens to be 525 nanometer, the wavelength. And Doug, you might be able to correct me there, but I took that number and ran with it. So I printed out the color spectrum, and when I go in and I talk to them, if there are any fishermen in the room, I give them my little tip of the day, and a lot of people found that very useful for deep water lake trout fishing up here. After I came back to one place, this was early in the summer, people were eager. When I walked through the door, people ran up to me and said, what new research stuff or what new piece of information from the DNR can you bring us today about the fishery that is close to us? And so I've gotten into a habit of talking to my fish managers before I walk out the door and trying to find kind of the nugget of the day, so to speak, so that I have that in my hip pocket. And I have found that people are approaching me. They want me to come over now, and they want to know what I've learned from my research efforts or from my communications with people who have extensive knowledge about fishing and fisheries. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So would you say that maybe one, what we could take from that is a way sort of maintain a good relationship is sort of some sort of regular update or just sort of giving them new information to keep them keeping their knowledge and patience?
What I'm doing is I'm bringing, you know, again, in negotiations or in relationships, contractual relationships, you want both sides to thrive. And so by bringing them something that is useful to them, for them, enlightens them and empowers them, you're not trying to build them up. You're legitimately trying to take care of their interests. And they see a value in that. So I think the thing is to bring them something useful. Factoids are not useful. Information that they can use that benefit their fisheries or their operations. The local bait shop here in Duluth, when I told them that now they're telling their clients, we've got this bit of information. We can help you pick a lure better than you previously could have, and now they've got a better rapport with their clients as a result of information that I shared with them. I'm not taking any liability for fish catches as a result of my recommendation on fish colors, lure colors, but I'm trying to bring them something that they can use that's useful to their day when they go out on the water.
Great, thank you.
And then, so we had Angelique with the St. Croix River Association chime in the chat, and I think this maybe falls a little bit more under maybe challenges to engaging and talking to folks, but she tried calling bait shops last year before she popped in, and she thinks that that helped make sure that the right person was in the store when she was able to pop in, or people with the St. Croix River Association were to pop in, so they were talking to the manager maybe instead of somebody that just works a few hours a week. But then it also meant that there were multiple impressions there. Even if you weren't talking to the bait shop for very long on the phone, it was just something to remind them that, hey, the St. Croix River Association's here. We're here to help. We're here to listen. So she thought that could be effective.
Before we move on, any other ideas on either maintaining a good relationship or overcoming challenges?
This is Jeannie. I was thinking kind of an opposite way to approach it as far as tips. If I'm going to go to a boat launch in an area anyway, whenever I'm at a boat launch and clean boats, clean waters, fishermen are asking, what are people catching, this, that, and the other thing. And I'll ask the fishermen to come in first, so I'm prepared for later, but it might be an idea to make that bait shop stop first and ask them what they're hearing, because it gives, that gives them a way to help you that makes them feel powerful or whatever. That's not the best word, but and then you can start building the rapport off of that, or offer them something right there on the spot as far as the material, something along those lines. But to give a little two-way back and forth might be helpful.
I just want to say, I think that's a fantastic idea, because people want to feel heard, one, and two, they work with in this field all the time, so they likely have some, not every idea, but they have some really super ideas. So, and it gives them a sense of ownership and that they're being heard and listened to. So I just think that's a great idea.
Yeah, thanks, Jeannie. So we have only a few minutes left, so I'm going to move on, unless anyone is dying to answer one of these questions, move on to just our last couple of questions. And these might be more seeds to plant instead of questions we talk about now, but if you have ideas now, that's great. So you saw sort of an array of tools that are already available. What other tools or resources do you think might be helpful in this effort to you and or to bait shop owners? And then also, you know, we want to obviously keep track of how we're doing with this program and how well it's working, and you know, and that sort of involves the help from the end of everyone who's talking to bait shop owners. So, what are some ways that you think you'd be willing and able to help us evaluate the success?
This is Patricia with Jefferson County. I know the last time around when this got rolled out, I believe that we were sent lists of bait shops that were in our counties. Maybe you guys have access to lists because of license requirements. But I found that very helpful because I didn't know where they all were, so it was good to have that information. I don't know if you're able to do that again.
We'll have to check into that because I think we were able to get a list of licensed bait shops, and I'm not sure on the legality of everything, but there are also unlicensed bait shops, and I don't know if that's just because they're like not selling minnows or what some of the deal is, but there are bait shops that exist that are not on that list we can get. But we'll hunt for the list that was sent out originally and see if we can get an updated version of that.
Any other tools or resources that you think would help you? Sounds like maybe no. And then, I guess lastly, thinking about evaluation. You know, we understand you have a lot. You all have a lot on your plates. And what do you feel willing and able to help? Are able to do in terms of helping evaluate the program, based on sort of your past experiences evaluating programs, or et cetera?
So this, I think, could range anywhere from just tracking some of the data or your activities under this a little bit better. So we could send out a spreadsheet or a form where you could just track your visits and say, hey, we popped in, this is how the experience went. You could just keep track of where you visit. Or we could do some more in-depth stuff. Like folks could agree to maybe be a part of a focus group after a year or something like that, or fill out an expanded survey. There are all sorts of things people could do to help out for the evaluation.
This is Jeannie. I was just thinking, I was looking at some of our work planning already for this year and thinking, oh, I sure hope we hire a Clean Boats, Clean Waters person again. And that person would probably be the one that would do the bait shops if that works into the schedule. And I heard someone else mention before they had interns going out and doing it. So whatever is used for evaluation, it might be helpful to have something that those people specifically can fill out, because by the time they're gone, you may not have done the evaluation yet in any other way, and so the person who they're working with that taught them what to do or whatever would have that to rely on for some of the feedback.
That's a real good thought, Jeannie. That's definitely something I would have overlooked.
Any other ideas on evaluation?
You know, one thought on evaluation is I think going back to that Cornell report, I thought it was interesting that I didn't even know that was going on. So they were evaluating us at a state level, but looking at the indicators that they use, just so it's comparable to different states, might be interesting.
Thanks, Bret.
Oh, well, if there's no other discussion, I think we'd just like to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully you found the presentations and the in-depth discussion on some of this, on the bait shop initiative useful, and that you feel a little bit more comfortable tackling it the second time around. I think both Jenny and I are more than willing to answer any questions, help people work through things as you're starting to implement it, and look for some more information from us in the near future on ordering products and how to get all of the toolkit that you need. So if there is nothing else, thank you, and have a happy holidays if we don't talk to you before then, and we'll catch you all soon.
See you, Tim.